Vladimiro was 30 when his father chose to end his life. Standing before his corpse, he turned to Francisco Loaiza and asked, "Do you think this son of a bitch could ruin my career?" Francisco Montesinos, Panchito to his friends, was the youngest of 14 siblings in a distinguished Arequipian family. But he married Elsa Torres, a woman of very humble origins. That decision, among others, sealed the Montesinos family's contempt and permanent exile. Everyone turned their backs on him. Since then, his life spiraled into failures and hardships, and he tried to drown his frustrations in alcohol daily. Francisco lived defeated, addicted, and complacent, which made it hard for his oldest son to respect him. They didn't get along. Even so, Francisco had high expectations for Vladimiro. He forced him to start a career in the army and tried to help him with the little he had. The last time he tried, it cost him his life. It began the night Vladimiro, after drinking too much, ran over a man while driving his white Fiat. Some say that this man died after the impact and that Francisco did everything he could to save his son from such tremendous guilt. He took a large sum of money from his workplace, and together with the little savings he had, Vladimiro silenced the affected family and saved his son's career. But this embezzlement got him into serious trouble that quickly escalated, and he couldn't stop it. Trapped and desperate for answers, he devised a risky plan that, if successful, could restore everything. He stole more company money. He went to the Monterrico racetrack, chose a horse, and bet everything, even his life. Panchito had already decided what to do if he lost, and that's what happened. When his horse lost, he knew his fate was sealed. He visited the Arolo bar in Pueblo Libre, vaguely said goodbye to friends, rented a cheap room near home, and after taking a lethal dose of drugs, ended his life. But minutes before that, he made one last decision. He got a pen, a piece of paper, and wrote a note that he folded and put in his pocket. A small posthumous message addressed to his eldest son, which said, "Never be poor." Vladimiro wasn't saying goodbye, but leaving a message telling his son not to be like him. Something Vladimiro already knew. Perhaps the greatest certainty he had was being completely different from his father. They never really had a good relationship. It began when he was 14 and unwillingly enrolled in the boarding school of the Francisco Bolognese Military Academy, followed by the Corrillos Military School at 16, thanks to a forged birth certificate by Panchito himself. And that's how Vladimiro spent his adolescence, as a prisoner of an inflexible regime to which he never wanted to belong. Rules, hierarchies, punishments, exercises. Up at 5:30, make the bed, wash up, get dressed, eat before 7, then classes and exercises until 6 p.m. formation, and dinner at 7, then study until 9. A relentless cycle allowed only obedience in a world where he never could or wanted to stand out. His superiors saw him as a weak, passive boy with no presence, and his classmates called him Tweety. He didn't have the will for physical activities and didn't take part in the soccer games either. But he was organized, neat, and had a much broader vocabulary than his classmates, expressed himself better, and defended his positions well. All of that was thanks to reading, to his early passion for knowledge and literature, a very peculiar and distinctive trait among the other cadets. Vladimiro liked to project that intellectual image. That's why he was always seen with a book under his arm, although many times it was nothing more than a well-rehearsed pose, with which he tried to appear to read more than he actually did. He didn't fit in that place, but he understood its rules and soon began to develop the strategy that allowed him to survive. The first thing was not to draw attention, not to meddle, and not to get on anyone's bad side. And from the shadows, he began to weave a network of contacts, favors, and loyalties, of useful alliances that would allow him to build an arsenal of information. Vladimiro learned early how useful and deadly this weapon was in his hands, even more so than those he was taught to use. He began recording the information in a small notebook, and it became a habit. He recorded secrets, rumors, schedules, illnesses, and weaknesses about both peers and superiors. This thorough information enabled him to achieve what others couldn't in later years. He used the power of that notebook to walk out of the boarding school through the front door without climbing walls or being reported, stealing exams before tests, pressuring, manipulating, threatening, and blackmailing students and teachers. Montesinos was smart and knew how to subtly manipulate people so they would end up doing what he wanted. His big problem was being careless and absent-minded, leaving loose ends. This flaw would cost him his freedom years later. But in '64, it almost cost him his career when one of the authorities at the Carrillo School found that notebook full of confidences in his room with an alarming and obsessive level of detail, as well as evidence of many offenses, escapes, blackmail, and extortion. More than enough reason to be expelled from the institution. But Vladimiro's last name was Montesinos. His uncle Alfonso was a key member of parliament then, and his godfather was General Prada. Both forces joined together to get him out of trouble. Perhaps this was the first time Vladimiro experienced the perks of having powerful connections in Lima. Thanks to that, he graduated as an ensign and was assigned to a barracks in Tingo, Arequipa, at the start of '66. So after 5 years studying in Lima, he was able to return to his hometown. But Vladimiro didn't plan to stay in that barracks for long. He chose to pursue 2 degrees, law at San Agustin University and sociology at Santa Maria Catholic University. But 2 years later, in 1968, he was promoted to lieutenant and sent back to Lima, to the Bolivar barracks in the Magdalena neighborhood. He moved back in with his parents and siblings, transferring his law studies to Universidad Mayor de San Marcos and sociology to Pontifical Catholic University of Peru, studies that he progressed very slowly with at night. In October that year, another key event occurred for Montesinos and the country. The armed forces under Juan Velasco Alvarado staged a coup against Democrat Fernando Belaúnde Terry. The military took power, and Vladimiro couldn't help but look at that revolution with curiosity and aspirations. He was still young and inexperienced, needing 5 more years before chasing those big dreams. This occurred in the summer of '73, soon after his promotion to captain. He had everything set up and planned months in advance until the right moment arrived. He took a bus to Punta Hermosa and waited outside General Edgardo Mercado Jarin's house, the Minister of War and President of the Council of Ministers in Velasco's government, carrying documents and a rehearsed speech. He took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. Mercado's wife answered. Vladimiro introduced himself and briefly explained the reason for his visit, politely requesting a meeting with the general. But he was resting, so they asked him to leave. However, luck was on Captain Montesinos' side. That afternoon, the general's room was on the 2nd floor, near the main door, and he was able to hear the conversation. Motivated by curiosity, he went downstairs and decided to attend to him. Vladimiro knew exactly what to say and how to say it. He had rehearsed it dozens of times in front of the mirror. He'd introduce himself as a captain, mention his double university degree in progress, then offer subtle compliments, emphasizing that they shared Arequipeñan roots, as well as an interest in strategy, intelligence, and geopolitics. Finally, he would show him one of his essays. Vladimiro knew which buttons to press. After thoroughly studying the general's personality and tastes, he impressed and persuaded him. It was a great victory. Everything went as he planned. After that meeting, Vladimiro would become his assistant on Army and National Development matters. That meeting was the beginning of his political military career. He had dreamed for years of his first approach to power, so he didn't waste any time. He began with simple tasks and gradually advanced, eventually finding many opportunities. Vladimiro quickly recognized these opportunities and began planning how to achieve them. During that time, he met new people and used the formula he had mastered. First, we examined origins, likes, preferences, flaws, and quirks. All sorts of information to help him build trust and connect with people without revealing his true intentions. General Mercado quickly noticed Captain Montesinos' skills and began to trust him more and more. Over the months, he began to delegate his schedule to him and even delicate and important decisions. Vladimiro became his trusted advisor during key moments. They grew into friends and confidants. That year, the general agreed to be godfather at his marriage to Maria Trinidad Becerra, with whom he later had 2 daughters. That afternoon, during the celebration of their wedding, all the military personnel present received an order that forced them to return immediately to their posts, including the groom. The reason was urgent. President Velasco had just had a leg amputated after an aneurysm ruptured. His military government appeared to be inevitably ending. Then, Mercado Harín gathered all his advisors to define his next actions. Vladimiro knew what had to be done: gather forces, stage a coup, and seize power before anyone else. He proposed it, but Mercado doubted they'd support him, and filled with doubt, rejected his plan. Vladimiro felt the power he had just discovered slipping through his fingers, so he decided to take a chance. His last card. He proposed to the general a much more structured plan, which began with assassinating Velasco Alvarado when he passed through Paseo de la República Avenue, known as El Sanjón. He calculated everything precisely and coordinated every detail. The people were ready. He just needed his boss's confirmation, but it never came. It was then that Vladimiro realized that his days of power alongside the prime minister were numbered, and he had to make the most of his time. He scheduled many trips and began organizing lunches, meetings, and cocktails to network and strengthen ties with useful contacts. The most significant were the United States Embassy officials, who valued meeting someone so important within the Ministry of War, of a military government closely linked to the Soviet Union. The Americans highly valued Captain Montesinos' willingness and dedication to collaborate, so they gladly accepted his subtle offer to work as an undercover agent. At that moment, his spy career began, allowing him to use his innate talent effectively. Of the calling he'd felt since military school, he could now take it to the highest level, which Vladimiro had already anticipated. He had been stealing documents from General Mercado's office for months, organizing them, and gradually sharing the valuable information with his new friends. From the embassy and the CIA, he didn't charge them yet. That came later. His long-term plan was set, and everything seemed to be going perfectly. But once again, he was betrayed by those small flaws, by those oversights that made him an imperfect spy. One afternoon, General Mercado discovered with dismay that numerous private documents had disappeared from his office. Sensitive information like arms purchases, trials, military promotions, and letters with Fidel Castro and Fidel Lopez Michelsen had vanished. Mercado, furious, threatened everyone and demanded an immediate, thorough investigation. Vladimiro felt the truth closing in, but fear didn't paralyze him, and he acted quickly. He beat the general to it and dramatically burst into tears. He admitted with regret and shame to taking the papers out of intellectual curiosity and to prepare reports and essays. Motivated by the great admiration he had for him, which would never allow him to harm him, Vladimiro had the gift of being convincing when he lied. That skill, mixed with tears, allowed him that night to make his boss believe him. He was very close to being discovered, but the risk was worth it. The information he provided, it ended up sealing his alliance with the CIA, establishing himself as a spy. In his last year, he traveled across Latin America, as well as France, Spain, Algeria, and the United States. Near the end of 1974, at General Edgardo Mercado's farewell lunch, Harín requested a transfer to the Ministry of Agriculture. Mercado received a special surprise, a full scholarship to study at Brazil's prestigious Superior War College. Vladimiro chose to keep working in Lima, and his request was no coincidence. The Ministry of Agriculture had been handed over to General Enrique Gallegos, who was also the head of intelligence for President Velasco, and that was precisely the place Montesinos had been aiming for in recent years. In fact, Vladimiro had repeated with Gallegos the same tactic he used with Mercado, arriving at his office with well-prepared documents and projecting exceptional efficiency and dedication. Gallegos had been pleasantly impressed with the young captain, so he welcomed his addition to the Ministry of Agriculture. In fact, he needed someone like him, and that's why his transfer turned out to be much more convenient than his previous job. Vladimiro used his increased freedoms to further his spy career. However, as time went by, monotony began to affect his caution once again, neglecting incriminating details once again, and showing strange behaviors that his colleagues soon began to notice. On several occasions, Vladimiro left the office with a briefcase, crossed the street, and got in a van that circled the block and dropped him back at the same spot. Vladimiro got out of the vehicle, but without the briefcase. Speculation grew so much that his co-workers once secretly followed him to record the car's license plate. Then they approached General Gallegos and asked him to use his influence to find out about it. The investigation revealed that the car belonged to the United States Embassy. Intrigued, they investigated further and found in his office a poster board covered with generals' names, marked by pins of various colors. As usual, the rumor spread quickly inside the offices, and soon no one had any doubts left. Captain Montesinos was an undercover spy. This increased the surveillance of each of his movements. Vladimiro, weary of harassment and judgmental stares, requested a transfer to the new prime minister's offices, but was denied. The year 1975 was particularly dark and filled with misfortunes for Captain Montesinos. He ran over a man, his father took his own life, and he saw how Morales Bermudez carried out the coup that he himself had suggested to Mercado Charin 2 years ago. Everything would have been different if they'd listened to him, he thought. But now there was no turning back. The Peruvian army appeared to be dividing into 2 factions, and he was on the losing side. Gradually, the generals he knew, including his boss, General Enrique Gallegos, fell one by one. The new general's first actions included sending many lower-ranking officers, especially those close to former leaders, far from Lima. Vladimiro received one of the harshest punishments, exiled to the remote Algarrobo barracks, or in the country's north. With no electricity or drinking water, hot days and freezing nights, Vladimiro didn't last long in that place before contacting his friends at the United States Embassy to accept what they had offered him months ago, to use the prestigious Grant Scholarship, which included a diplomatic trip to Washington, New York, and San Francisco. An extraordinary scholarship that had never before nor after been granted to a military officer of such a low rank. On this trip, Vladimiro would try to take advantage of the new information he had, and the information he had reserved for extreme cases, like the one he felt he was in. So, he held numerous high-level diplomatic meetings, spoke with State Department officials, top military commanders, academic centers, and key CIA agents to whom he gave highly confidential documents and photos, highlighting a detailed and precise list of the weapons acquired by Peru from the Soviet Union. Was he committing treason? General Miguel Angel de la Flor, representative of the Inter-American Defense Board in Washington, also saw him. One afternoon, while casually talking with military friends, he heard a rumor that left him stunned. Captain Montesinos was in Washington, and no one had notified him about his arrival or the reasons for his trip. A strange fact that made him suspicious. He knew Captain Montesinos briefly, and a few months earlier he had heard another rumor about him, where the word spy echoed. Alarmed, General de la Flor promptly contacted the Peruvian embassy in Washington to check their awareness, but they didn't know anything either. He informed numerous officials and military contacts to discover what the young captain was doing in America. After comparing several versions, the truth became terribly clear. Captain Montesinos had forged a permit to leave his post and deliver confidential documents to the United States government, constituting a clear crime of treason against the homeland, which had to be punished with the utmost severity, the death penalty. Vladimiro Montesinos landed in Lima on September the 24th, 1976 at 11 in the morning and was arrested at that moment. Afterwards, the authorities raided and thoroughly searched his residence, finding there conclusive evidence that confirmed all the suspicions. Detailed inventories of the Soviet weaponry acquired by Peru, secret financial reports, work agendas, bill project summaries, and even intimate secrets of some ministers. No doubt, I was facing a double agent who leaked confidential information to the enemy for his own personal benefit, and there was enough evidence to convict him. They then called his former boss, ex-minister, and retired General Edgardo Mercado Charin to testify. Since investigation showed Vladimiro took documents from his office years earlier, when he was his advisor, Mercado had already connected the dots and pieced the story together. He knew perfectly well that Vladimiro had established ties with the CIA using his own documents. Everything he tearfully confessed that afternoon when discovered was a lie. Even knowing his testimony could bring justice, he still chose to lie. He flatly denied the rumors about the missing documents, claiming that it was a misunderstanding and that he later found them in his office. Would telling the truth have finally condemned the one who betrayed him? But Vladimiro had too much information, and digging deeper into charges of betrayal would have lifted a rug full of buried questions. What might Vladimiro do or say to save himself? How much did he know, and what was he still hiding? A man used to recording everything? Thinking about what could be uncovered sent chills not only through Mercado, but through many others as well. Generals, secretaries, judges, prosecutors. A blow that was too strong and whose domino effect could put the balance of the institutions at risk, so they preferred to avoid it. So instead of charging him with treason, the summary trial was reduced to abandonment of post and document forgery, leading to a 4-year prison sentence. Thanks to his cousin and lawyer Sergio Cardinal Montesinos' successful appeal, the sentence was reduced to 2 years and could be shortened further for good behavior. Vladimiro got off easy for his betrayal, given how close he came to the maximum penalty. He didn't see it that way. He just knew he'd hit rock bottom. After his dishonorable discharge from the Peruvian army, loss of captain rank, and imprisonment at Bolivar Barracks from September 1976 to February 1978. At 31, he faced a ruined military career and incomplete university education after over a decade of study. But worst of all, he had no source of income and his daughter Silvana had just been born. Those must have been the hardest moments of his life up to that point, full of uncertainty and regret. For a moment, he thought his life was over, and that advice he found in his father's pocket had never sounded so cruel. Never be poor, Vladimiro. Now he was even poorer than his father had been. These unbearable thoughts hammered his mind day and night for a while, until he remembered that commandment that ruled his life, to be completely different from him. Giving up wasn't an option, so he used his time in prison to advance his law career, to reflect on his mistakes and carefully plan his next moves. His cousin, Sergio Cardinal Montesinos, was key at this stage. He reduced his sentence and encouraged him to finish his studies, promising a job at his law firm after his release. When the day arrived, Vladimiro knew what to do. First, he would irregularly process his degree. Did he still have useful information and contacts? No official records exist of how he did it, but he joined the Lima Bar Association and accepted his cousin's proposal. He already knew where to aim. His goal was set on the court headquarters in the port of Callao, where cases related to smuggling were abundant. His embassy contacts and many favors from his spy years let him effectively defend small-time smugglers and tax evaders. By solving their problems through discreet arrangements in the judiciary and the prosecutor's office, Vladimiro's effectiveness in speeding up and resolving issues through bribes gradually brought him new clients. He soon navigated the judicial world and mastered its rules, making it simple for him. For him, the job was about knowing the right people in the right courts. And if he didn't know anyone, he had to find someone who did. That was it. Vladimiro had always collected pieces for his board, but now their colors had changed and the military chiefs no longer interested him. Now he needed police officers, prosecutors, judges, and clerks, with whom he began to systematize processes that became routine. He soon saw tax evaders and smugglers as small clients. It was time to think bigger. The real loot was with the drug traffickers. He began by assisting small-time dealers at Jorge Chavez Airport and grew his contacts until landing his first major client, that big fish he had been patiently waiting for on the shore. But he wasn't just sitting around. When Vladimiro Montesinos wanted something, he pursued it. It began the morning he read a newspaper story. They had just captured the notorious Colombian drug trafficker, Evaristo Porras Ardila, a Medellin cartel leader in Peru. Porras's downfall had been so unexpected that he wasn't prepared. He didn't have enough cash to buy his freedom right away. And once the news was published in the newspaper, everything got complicated. Luckily for Evaristo, a guardian angel appeared. A young lawyer willing to risk everything without guarantees, driven only by hopes of success. That's how it was. Vladimiro arrived with a flawless plan. He couldn't fix everything by giving out thick envelopes of money this time. but he had other resources. Porras first pretended to have severe abdominal pain to secure an emergency transfer to Callao Hospital, citing possible appendicitis. Inside the hospital, Vladimiro had already bought off the entire staff. Doctors, nurses, security guards, and custodians were paid to facilitate the drug traffickers' escape through the back door at midnight. Outside, Vladimiro would be waiting in his car to drive him to the Coyic Aero Club, where a plane with engines running awaited his arrival. The Colombian said goodbye, thanked his guardian angel before boarding, and promised to contact him soon. And he kept his promise. A few weeks later, Montesinos was invited to Rome, where Evaristo Porras Ardila greeted him as a valued friend, gave him cash, and invited him to stay in Europe for a month. At the end of this time, he gave him a briefcase with $1 million inside. Less than a year ago, Vladimiro was sleeping desolate in prison, and now he was a millionaire. He boarded the plane to Lima, aware this was only the beginning. The Colombian drug trafficker had promised to promote him to his colleagues. Dr. Montesinos is the best, he told everyone. Aware that he had entered the big leagues, he decided to strengthen himself. Lima was big, and it was impossible to know everyone. He chose to team up with his prison friend, lawyer Jorge Weinberry, a man with a profile very similar to his, but with many more years of experience in the field. He had been imprisoned on charges of smuggling and drug trafficking, and after getting out, both promised to share a common goal: to dedicate their lives to getting rich, having fun, and most importantly, staying under the radar, keeping a low profile. However, over the years, only one of them would be able to fulfill the last clause of this promise, but that would come later. If you're enjoying the video, I invite you to like and subscribe, and if you'd like to support the content of this channel, I also invite you to join, access the exclusive benefits, and encourage more stories like this one. Montesinos and Weinberry merged their networks, gaining significant influence, particularly in the judicial system. In this way, they began to solve dozens of major cases, rapidly increasing their fortunes to levels that even they themselves could hardly believe. Soon, everything that money could buy was within their reach, especially people. They became fond of high-end tech, the priciest brothels, luxurious restaurants, and the finest suits and watches. Vladimiro left his small apartment on a little balcony and bought one located on the 11th floor of an elegant building in San Isidro to live with his wife and daughter. The former captain's confidence and ego soared to the highest level. It was at that high point in his life that problems began to arise with his first cousin, the lawyer Sergio Cardenal Montesinos, the same one who had defended him in his military trial. His former playmate and partner in teenage mischief, to whom he owed more than just his freedom, had been his friend and advisor in difficult times, encouraged him to finish his studies, and gave him a place in his law office. He made him his partner. Now, Vladimiro saw him as a burden, an inferior. Sergio didn't take part in his cousin's business. He felt it wasn't his place or his field. This deepened the rift between them. They had many arguments, but the biggest fight was caused by a terrible betrayal. Sergio was married to Grace Riggs, but Vladimiro intentionally seduced her, beginning a secret affair that lasted years. Everything erupted in the family when the truth came out, and Vladimiro started a legal fight, determined to defend himself and completely ruin him without remorse or guilt. Money made everything else seem insignificant. He no longer had worries. He had achieved everything he ever dreamed of, and much more for poor. He perfected a foolproof corruption system with several escape routes in case a bribe failed or an official rebelled. Vladimiro could use Plan B, which meant making judicial or police records and reports vanish, erasing evidence. It was simple with the right connections, as Vladimiro controlled a triangulated network of police, prosecutors, and judges. 3 pillars forming a criminal web that could solve anything. In one of his most difficult cases, he didn't hesitate to order the explosion of a police laboratory to permanently eliminate that incriminating evidence. Dr. Montesinos appeared unstoppable, and by the 1980s he had millions in his own and his front men's accounts. And he got so used to having money that it stopped satisfying him. It had become a goal he had already achieved, and he felt it was time to pursue bigger things. But what could be more important than money? Vladimiro had a clear answer to that. Money allowed him to temporarily buy the power to influence other people's decisions, but it didn't give him autonomy or absolute control over that power he sometimes possessed. He started searching for it, driven by revenge. He wanted to get revenge on those military men who had gotten rid of him, unjustly accusing him of being a spy. Send him to a harsh barracks, then lock him up, plunging him into his darkest time. Montesinos had already obtained through phone tapping enough evidence to ruin them. He had a plan, and to execute it, he found the ideal ally, Augusto Zimmerman. They'd known each other since childhood. Their grandmothers were friends, and both felt betrayed by Morales Bermudez's generals. Their shared desire for revenge united them. Zimmerman owned Cosacum, a magazine focused on the military. Vladimiro used it to expose incriminating acts from the Morales Bermudez government. The commander of the army, General Pedro Ricci, raised his voice, denied the events, claimed that those documents were forged, and threatened to go after the forgers. But this was exactly what Montesinos wanted to happen, since in the next issue of the magazine, it would be dedicated to showing the official seals and citing all the logbooks that would confirm the authenticity of the documents shown, proving that he was telling the truth. It was a calculated trick, a master move that left the high command without answers. But that wasn't all. In the next issue of Cosacum, he exposed the operation of a telephone interception center located on Washington Street in downtown Lima, revealing the technical characteristics of the interception, the brand of the recorders, the names of the spies, and even the shifts they worked. The scandal was so big that soon television cameras gathered. There was a flurry of flashes, and the news echoed internationally. Vladimiro had dealt a hard blow to military intelligence from the shadows, a revenge that brought him great satisfaction but also multiplied his enemies. General Armando Briceño threatened to revisit his treason case, and the phone at Vladimiro's house started ringing nonstop every night. The same thing happened to Zimmerman. They began receiving direct threats to themselves and their families. Vladimiro didn't feel worried until the afternoon when a bomb exploded under his partner Jorge Weinberg's car, turning the vehicle into scrap metal. At first, Vladimiro reacted with fury and fought back. He knew exactly who had planted that bomb in his partner's car. In the next magazine issue, he put the responsible person's face on the cover, without imagining that his enemy's response would be devastating, much more than he had anticipated. One morning, as he left his house, he heard the unmistakable sound of a camera shutter clicking toward his face. Photographer Carlos Saavedra waited all night outside his house. When Vladimiro saw him, he felt crushed, but didn't freeze. Instead, he tried to avoid him, got in his Pontiac, and started a frantic chase through Lima's streets. His car had twice the engine capacity of Saavedra's Volkswagen. Fortunately, the photographer found a police station for refuge and, once safe, took this photograph before Vladimiro fled. A week later, that image was the cover of Carreta magazine, sealing it with a headline that summed up the mysterious former Captain Vladimiro Montesinos in an instant. In September 1983, Vladimiro was forced to come out of the shadows and face the public eye. From that moment on, everything would change for him. He would no longer walk calmly through the streets, much less during the day, and he even stopped going to his office. But hiding would not save him from the fury his revenge had unleashed. One night, he didn't come home. Soldiers raided it under the pretense of a search, though it was far from typical. They took apart the drawers, the beds, even his daughter's crib. They lifted the floors, slashed the armchairs, the mattresses, and even the car tires. But they found nothing. Vladimiro had learned the lesson not to keep anything incriminating at home, and they knew it, or at least they suspected it. That violent operation wasn't just a simple search for evidence, but a clear message. His military trial for treason had been reopened. Vladimiro panicked, chills running through him when he found out, and fled immediately to Argentina. Buenos Aires was always his favorite city, and he lived there in luxury without working. He stayed in exile as long as necessary until time and his men could calm things down in Lima. He got his trial dismissed and returned even better positioned, though he still had to stay in the shadows. That didn't stop him from handling the decade's top drug trafficking cases. The biggest and most profitable was the Villa Coca case, a scandal that came to light when a cocaine hydrochloride laboratory exploded in a house in Circuillo, which was interconnected with 11 other homes, almost an entire city block dedicated to the mass production of the illegal substance. This discovery not only exposed the magnitude of the criminal networks in the country, but also the impunity with which they operated. This allowed Vladimiro not only to make a lot of money, but also to defend important military officers who were involved, gaining the trust of the new generals and regaining his influence in the upper echelons of the army. After all, his former enemies were just retired generals, now irrelevant. Vladimiro resumed hosting large parties, now including military, police, lawyers, prosecutors, and politicians. He was paving the way to fulfill another ambition, joining the National Intelligence Service in a shadowy but effective role. He wasn't interested in the salary and didn't bother to collect it. Vladimiro had been searching for real power for years, and by the late 1980s, he finally seemed to be catching a glimpse of it. Everything began to take shape on April 8, 1990, after the first round of presidential election results. Mario Vargas Llosa was leading with 32.6, closely followed by the outsider Alberto Fujimori, who got 29.2. Since neither surpassed the 50% threshold, everything had to be decided in a second round scheduled for June 10. 2 months later, Alberto Fujimori faced a problem that threatened to ruin his candidacy. It was a tax evasion accusation related to the houses he built and sold with his wife Susanna Iguchi as part of a family real estate business. The media appeared to target him with daily new revelations about alleged irregularities in his transactions, including transfer taxes and fictitious prices. But who was giving them all this information? Fujimori desperately sought specialized lawyers who could solve his case, but they did nothing. He was the only one with the ability to resolve it. He waited for him outside his home in a gold Toyota for 15 nights. The meetings at the candidate's house began at 11 p.m. and ended after 3 a.m. Vladimiro knew his opportunity was close, that's why he stayed there. He just had to wait for his old friend, Francisco Loaiza, to mention his name at the right meeting. Francisco Loaiza, the same one who was with him the night his father took his own life. Do you think this son of a bitch could ruin my career? He would also be the one in charge of making sure Alberto Fujimori heard his name for the first time, along with a big promise to quickly solve his tax problem. Fujimori was extremely distrustful, but even so, he authorized Vladimiro to enter the meeting, and that was the first time the engineer and the doc saw each other face to face. The first time they shook hands, Vladimiro was strangely nervous that night, maybe because advising a president had been his goal for years. Alberto Fujimori still had to defeat Mario Vargas Llosa to make it happen. But Vladimiro knew that his instincts weren't deceiving him. He was standing in front of the future president of Peru and needed to ingratiate himself with him. However, the first impression wasn't great. Vladimiro had done it before, but that night his nerves got the best of him. He assured Fujimori there was nothing to worry about and promised to resolve his problem in 3 days. He suggested focusing on the campaign and pulled out some papers. Second round, he had the formula to defeat Vargas Llosa. First, start calling him just Vargas. Fujimori eyed the anxious, talkative person with distrust, abruptly stopped him, and asked him to leave. He needed to handle his own issue before he could keep listening to him. It was an awkward moment. Vladimiro began to quietly put away his papers. Surely, no one had treated him that way in years. He told Loaiza, "I'll wait in the car." Engineer. He had been tough and distant with him, but that was about to change. Solving his problem seemed like child's play for Vladimiro. He finished removing the trap, which many say he set in under 2 hours, but he decided to be patient this time and wait until the third night. The good news pleasantly surprised Alberto Fujimori and his wife. They thanked him a lot. Those looks of distrust had vanished and would not appear again. They opened an orange liqueur, and during the toast, he was like the best lawyer in the world. The engineer invited him to sit down and asked him to explain again what that plan to win the elections was about. A conversation that would become the butterfly effect for the history of a country. But that's another story. If you like the video and want to see the second part on this channel, I invite you to subscribe and leave a comment. And if you don't want to wait, to get more information about this topic, I recommend reading one of these 3 books. The Imperfect Spy, The Life and Times of a Corrupter, by Luis Hoshamowitz, and The Dark Face of Power in Peru, by Francisco Loaiza, books from which I got the necessary information to make this story. If you liked it, I invite you to check out other stories on the channel that you might also enjoy. See you in the next one. Goodbye.